Hello, welcome to Side Minds. If you have not subscribed yet to the channel, do subscribe, like, and share. I am currently reading We the Living by Anne Rand, chapter 13. In the summer, Petrograd was a furnace. The wooden bricks of the pavements cracked into black gashes, dry as an empty riverbed. The walls seemed to breathe of fever, and the roofs smelt of burnt pain. Through eyes hazy in a white glare, men looked hopelessly for a tree in the city of stone. When they found a tree, they turned away. Its motionless trees were grey with parched dust. Hair stuck to foreheads, horses shook flies off their foaming nostrils. The Neva lay still. Little drops of fire played lazily on the water like clusters of spangles and made the men on the bridges feel hotter. Whenever they could, Kira and Leo went away for a day in the country. They walked hand in hand in the stripes of sun and pine shadows. Like columns of dark bricks, like sinewy bodies, sunburned to bronze and peeling the in strips of light bark, the pines guarded the road and dropped jealously through a heavy tangle of malachite. A few rays, a few stripes of soft blue. On the green slopes of ditches, little purple dots of violets bent to a patch of yellow sand, and only the crystal luster of the sand showed water over it. Kira took off her shoes and stockings, soft dust and pine needles between her toes. She kicked the little black balls of fallen pine cones. Leo swung her slippers at the end of a dry branch, his white shirt unbuttoned, his sleeves rolled back above his elbow. Her bare feet pattered over the boards of an old bridge. Through the white cracks, she saw sparks swimming like fish scales down the stream and polywogs wiggling in swarms of little black commas. They sat alone in a meadow. Tall grass rose like a wall around them, over their heads. A hot blue sky descended to the sharp green tips. The sky seemed to smell of clover. A cricket droned like an electric engine. She sat on the ground. Leo lay stretched, his head on her lap. He chewed the end of a long grass stem. The movement of his hand holding it had the perfection of a foreign cigarette ad. Once in a while, she bent down to kiss him. They sat on a huge tree root over a river. The spreading stars of ferns on the slope below looked like a jungle of dwarf palms. The white trunk of a birch tree sparkled in the sun, its leaves like a waterfall that streamed down, green drops remaining suspended in the air, trembling, turning silver and white and green again, dropping once in a while to be swept away by the current. Kira leaped over the rocks, roots, and ferns as swift, agile, and joyous as an animal. Leo watched her. Her movements were sharp, angular, inexpressibly graceful in that contradiction of all grace, not the soft, fluent movements of a woman, but the broken, jerking, precise geometrical movements of a futuristic dancer. He watched her perched on a dead tree trunk, looking down into the water, her hands at straight angles to her arms, her elbows at straight angles to her body at a straight angle to her legs, a wild, broken little figure, tense, living like a lightning in shape. Then he sprang up and ran after her and held her, breaking the straight angles into a straight line crushed against him. The dead trunk hanging over the stream creaked perilously. She laughed, that strange laughter of hers which was too joyous to be gay, a laughter that held a challenge and triumph and ecstasy. Her lips were moist, glistening. When they returned to the city, the stifling dusk met with them with posters and banners and headlines, four letters flaming over the streets: USSR. The country had a new name and a new constitution. The All Union Congress of Soviets had just decided so. Banners said, "The Union of Socialist Soviet Republics is the kernel for the future growth of a world state." Demonstrations marched through the hot, dusty street, red kerchiefs mopping sweating foreheads. Our power is in the tight welding of the collective. A column of children, drums beating, marched into the sunset, a layer of bare legs and a layer of blue trunks, and a layer of white shirts and a layer of red ties, the kindergarten of the party, the pioneers. Their high, young voices sang, "To the greedy bourgeois sorrow, we shall light our fire tomorrow, our world fire of blood." Once Kira and Leo attempted to spend a night in the country. "Certainly," said the landlady. "Certainly, citizens, I can let you have a room for the night, but first you must get a certificate from your Upravdom as to where you live in the city and permit from your militia department. And then you must bring me your labor books and I must register them with our Soviet here and our militia department and get a permit for you as transient guest, and there's a tax to pay, and then you can have the room." They stayed in the city. Galina Petrovna had made a bold decision and taken a job. She taught sewing in a school for workers' children. She rocked through dusty miles in a tramway across the city to the factory district. She washed little grimy hands, fashioning shirts and aprons, and sometimes letter on a red banner. She talked of the importance of needlework and of the Soviet government's constructive policy in the field of education. Alexander Dmitrievich slept most of the day. When he was awake, he played solitaire on the ironing board in the kitchen and mixed painstakingly an imitation milk of water, starch, and saccharine for Plutarch, the cat he had found in the gutter. When Kira and Leo came to visit them, there was nothing to talk about. Galina Petrovna spoke too shrilly and too fast about the education of the masses and the sacred calling of the intelligentsia in serving their less entitled brothers. Lydia talked about the things of the spirit. Alexander Dmitrievich said nothing. Galina Petrovna had long since dropped all hints related to the institution of marriage. Only Lydia was flustered when Leo spoke to her. She blushed, embarrassed and thrilled. Kira visited them because Alexander Dmitrievich watched her silently when she came, with a feeble shadow of a smile, as if, had it not been for a dull haze suddenly grown between him and the life around him, he would have been glad to see her. Kira sat on a windowsill and watched the first autumn rain on the sidewalk. Glass bubbles sprang up in an ink puddle, a ring around each bubble, and floated for a brief second and burst helplessly like little volcanoes. Rain drummed dully against all the pavements of the city. It sounded like the distant purring of a slow engine with just one thin trickle of water through the rumble, like a faucet leaking somewhere close by. One single figure walked in the street below, an old collar raised between hunched shoulder, hands in pocket, arms pressed tightly to his sides. He walked away, a lonely shadow, swaying a little, into the city of glistening roofs under a fog of thin, slanting rain. Kira did not turn on the light. Leo found her in the darkness by the window. He pressed his cheek to hers and asked, "What's the matter?" She said softly, "Nothing, just winter coming, a new year starting." "You're not afraid, are you, Kira? We have stood it so far." "No," said Kira. "I'm not afraid." The new year was started by the Upravdom. "It's like this citizen Kovalensky," he said, shifting from foot to foot, crumpling his cap in both hands and avoiding Leo's eyes. "It's on account of the domicile norm. There's a law about as how it's illegal for two citizens to have three rooms on account of overcrowding conditions, seeing as there are too many people in the city and there are overcrowding conditions and no place to live. The Jilotel sent me a tenant with an order for a room, and he's a good proletarian, and I got to give him one of your rooms. He can take the dining room and you can keep the other two. Also, this ain't the time when people could live in 7 rooms, and some people used to." The new tenant was a meek, elderly little man who stammered, wore glasses, and worked as bookkeeper for the shoe factory, Red Skorohod. He left early in the morning and came home late at night. He cooked on his own primus and never had any visitors. "I won't be in the way, Citizen Argonova," he had said. "I won't be in the way at all. It's just only as regard as to bathroom. If you will let me take a bath once a month, I'll be most grateful. As to the other necessities, there's a privy in the backyard. If you will excuse the mention, I won't mind. I won't annoy a lady. They moved their furniture out of the dining room into their remaining quarters and nailed to the connecting door. When Kira cooked in the drawing room, she asked Leo to remain in the bedroom. Self preservation, she told him, for both of us. Andrei had spent the summer on a party mission in the villages of the Volga. He met Kira again at the institute on the first day of the new semester. His suntan was a little deeper. The lines at the corner of his mouth were not a wound, not a scar, but looked like both. Kira, I knew I'll be glad to see you again, but I didn't know that I would be so happy. You have had a hard summer, haven't you, Andre? Thank you for your letters. They have kept me cheerful. She looked at the grimness of his lips. What have you what have they done to you, Andre? Who? But he knew that she knew. He did not look at her, but he answered, well, I guess everybody knows it. The villages, that's the dark spot on our future. They are not conquered. They are not with us. They have a red flag over the local Soviet and a knife behind their backs. They bow and they nod and they snicker in their beards. They stick pictures of Lenin over the barns where they hide their grain from us. You have read in the papers about the clubhouse they burned and the 3 communists they burnt in it. Alive? I was there the next day. Andre, I hope you got them. He could not restrain a smile. Why, Kira, are you saying that about men who fight communism? But they could have done it to you. Well, nothing happened to me. As you see, don't look at that scar on my neck, just grazed. The fool wasn't used to firearms. His aim wasn't very good. The boss of the Gozizdat had 5 pictures on the walls of his office. One of Karl Marx, one of Trotsky, one of Zinoviev, and 2 of Lenin. On his desk stood 2 small plaster busts of Lenin and Karl Marx. He wore a high-collared peasant blouse of expensive black satin. He looked at his manicured fingernails. Then he looked at Leo. I feel certain, Comrade Kolavensky, that you will welcome this opportunity to do your duty in our great cultural drive, as we all do. Leo asked, what do you want? This organization has taken the honorary post of cult chef to a division of the Black Balt Fleet. You understand what I mean, of course. In line with the new and brilliant move of the party towards a wider spread of education and proletarian culture, we have accepted the position of cultural chief to a less enlightened unit. Us, as all institutions of note have done, we are thus responsible for the cultural advancement of our brave brothers of the Baltic Fleet. Such is our modest contribution to the gigantic rise of the new civilization for the new ruling class. Fine, said Leo. What do you want me to do about it? I think it is obvious, Comrade Kovalensky. We are organizing a free night school for our proteges. With your knowledge of foreign languages, I had a class of German in mind, twice a week. Germany is the cornerstone of our future diplomacy. And the next step of the world revolution in a class of English once a week. Of course, you are not to expect any financial remuneration for this work. Your services are to be donated, inasmuch as this is not an undertaking of the government but our strictly voluntary gift to the state. Since the beginning of the revolution, said Leo, I haven't been buying gifts for anyone, neither for my friends nor otherwise. I can't afford them. Comrade Kovalensky, did it ever occur to you to consider what we think of men who merely work for their pay and take no part in social activity in their spare time? Did it ever occur to you that I have a life to live in my spare time? The man at the desk looked at the 5 pictures on his wall. The Soviet state recognizes no life but that of a social class. I don't think we shall go into a discussion of the subject. In other words, you refuse to do your share. I do. Very well. This service is not compulsory, or not in the least. Its meaning and novelty is the free will of those participating. I was merely thinking of your own good when I made the offer. I thought, in view of certain events in your past, that you would be only too glad to Never mind. However, I must call to your attention the fact that Comrade Zobikov of the communist cell had been rather unpleasant about a man of your social past on our payroll, and when he heard about this, when he does, said Leo, tell him to come to me. I will give him a free lesson if he cares for the subject. Leo came home earlier than usual. The blue flame of the primus hissed in the gathering dusk. Kira's white apron was a white spot bending over the primus. Leo threw his cap and briefcase on the table. That's that, he said. I'm out. Kira stood holding a spoon. She asked, You mean the Gozidat? Gozisdat? Yes, fired. Reduction of staffs. Getting rid of the undesirable elements. Told me I was a Burgoy's attitude. I had a Burgoy's attitude. I'm not social minded. Well, well, it's all right. We'll get along. Of course, it's all right, I think. Think I care about their damn job? This affects me no more than a change in weather. Certainly. Now take your coat off and wash your hands, and we'll have dinner. Dinner? What do you have there? Beet soup. You like it? When did I say I liked it? I don't want any dinner. I'm not hungry. I'm going to the bedroom to study. Please don't disturb me. I won't. Left alone, Kira took a towel and lifted the cover of the pan and stirred the soup slowly, deliberately, longer than it required. Then she took a plate from the shelf. As she was carrying it to the table, she saw that the plate was trembling. She stopped and, in the dusk, whispered, addressing herself for the first time in her life, as if speaking to a person she had never met before. Now, Kira, you don't. You don't. You don't. She stood and held the plate over the table and stared down, all her will in her eyes, as if a great issue depended on the plate. Presently, the plate stopped trembling. When he had stood in line for an hour, he smoked a cigarette. When he had stood for 2 hours, he began to feel that his legs were numb. When he had stood for 3 hours, he felt that the numbness had risen to his throat and he had to lean against a wall. When his turn came, the editor looked at Leo and said, I don't see how we can use you, citizen. Of course, our publication is strictly artistic, but proletarian art, I may remind you. Strictly class viewpoint. You do not belong to the party, nor is your social standing suitable. You must agree. I have 10 experienced reporters, party members on my waiting list. She really didn't have to fry fish in lard, Kira decided. She could use sunflower seed oil. If she bought good oil in with if she bought good oil, it would leave no odor and it was cheaper. She counted the money out carefully over the cooperative counter and walked home, cautiously watching the heavy yellow liquid in a greasy bottle. The secretary said to Leo, Sorry you had to wait so long, citizen, but the comrade editor is a very busy man. You can go in now. The comrade editor leaned back in his chair. He held a bronze paper knife. The knife tapped the edge of a desk calendar bearing a picture of Lunacharsky, People's Commissar of Education and Art. The editor's voice sounded like a knife cutting paper. No opening. None expected. Plenty of proletarian starvings and you Burgoyes asking for a job. I'm a proletarian myself, straight from the workbench. I have been jobless in the old days. But your Burgoyes class brothers had no pity. It will do you good to learn how it feels on your own hide. It's a misunderstanding, citizens. Help interview hours are from 9 to 11, Thursday only. An hour and a half? Well, how did I know what you were sitting here for? Nobody asked you to sit. When he came home in the evenings, he was silent. Kira served dinner and he sat down at the table and ate. She had given great care to the dinner. He said nothing. He did not look into the steady grey eyes across the table, nor at the lips that smiled gently. He offered no complaint and no consolation. Sometimes, for many long moments, he stood before the crystal vase on the malachite stand, the one that had not been broken, and looked at it, his eyes expressionless, his hands in his pocket, a cigarette hanging in the corner of his mouth. He stood without moving, without blinking, the smoke alone stirring slowly, swaying. Then he smiled and the cigarette fell to the floor and burned smoking, a dark ring widening on the parquet. But he did not notice it, and Kira did not notice it, for her eyes were fixed, wide, and frightened on Leo's icy, sardonic smile. Any past experience, a citizen? No. Party member? No. Sorry, no opening. Next. It was Monday and the job had been promised to him for Monday. Leo stood before the little wizened office manager and knew that he should smile gratefully. But Leo never smiled when he knew he should, and perhaps it would have been useless. The office manager met him with a worried, apologetic look and avoided his eyes. So sorry, citizen. Yes, I promised you this job, but you see, the big boss's cousin came from Moscow and she's unemployed and unforeseen circumstances, citizen. You know, many proposes and God disposes. Come again, citizen. Kira went to the institute less frequently, but when she sat in a long, cold room and listened to lectures about steel and bolts and kilowatts, she straightened her shoulders as if a wrench had tightened the wires of her nerves. She looked at the man who sat beside her. At times she wondered whether those words about steel beams and girders were not about his bones and muscles, a man for whom steel had been created, or perhaps it was he that had been created for steel and concrete and white heat. She had long since forgotten where Andrei Taganov's life ended and that of engines began. When he questioned her solicitously, she answered, Andrei, any circles under my eyes are nothing but your own imagination, and you have never been in the habit of thinking about my eyes. When Leo sat down at the table, Kira's smile was a little forced. You see, there's no dinner tonight, she explained softly. That is, no real dinner, just this bread. The cooperative ran out of millet before my turn came. But I got the bread, that's your portion. And I fried some onion in sunflower seed oil. They are very good on the bread. Where's your portion? I've eaten it already before you came. How much did you get this week? Oh, well, they gave us a whole pound, imagine, instead of the usual half. Nice, isn't it? Yes, very. Only I'm not hungry. I'm going to bed. The little man next to Leo in line had an uncomfortable laugh, a servile, hissing sound at his palate that did not reach his throat as if he repeated mirthlessly the printed letters. He. I see you are looking at the red handkerchief in my breast pocket, citizen. He. He whispered confidentially into Leo's ear. I let you in on a secret. It's no handkerchief at all. See, just a little silk rag. When you go in, they think at first glance that it's a party badge or something. Then they see it ain't, but still there's the psychological effect. Helps if they have an opening for a job. Go on, your turn. Lord Jesus Christ, it's dark outside already. How time flies in lines, citizen. At the university cooperative, the student in line ahead of Leo said aloud to the companion, both wearing party badges. Funny, isn't it? The way some citizens neglect their lectures, but you are sure to find them in line for food rations. Leo said to the clerk behind the counter, trying to make his voice pleading and making it only wooden, expressionless. Comrade clerk, would you mind if I tear next week's coupon off too? I'll keep it and present it to you for my bread next week. You see, there's someone at home and I want to tell her that I got a 2 weeks ration and ate my half on the way home, so that she will eat all of this piece. Thank you, comrade. The burly office manager led Leo down a narrow corridor into an empty office with Lenin's picture on the wall and closed the door carefully. He had a friendly smile and heavy cheeks. More privacy here, citizen. It's like this, citizen. A job's a rare thing nowadays. A very rare thing. Now, a comrade that's got a responsible position has jobs to hand out. He's got something valuable to hand out, hasn't he? Now, then, a comrade that's got a reasonable position, responsible position, isn't making much of a salary these days, and things are expensive. One's got to live. A fellow that gets a job has something to be grateful for, hasn't he? Near broke, you say? Well, what do you want here, you bum? Expecting us proletarians to give job to every stray bourgeois? English, German, and French? Valuable, very valuable, citizen. We do need teachers for classes of languages. Are you a union member? Not any trade union? Sorry, citizen, we employ only union members. So you want to join the union of pedagogists? Very well, citizen, where are you working? I'm not working. You cannot join the union if you are not working. I can't get a job if I'm not a union member. If you have no job, you can't become a union member. Next, half a pound of linseed oil, please. The one that's not too rancid, please, if you can. No, I can't take sunflower seed oil. It's too expensive. Kira, what are you doing here in your nightgown? He raised his head from the book. A single bulb over the table left shadows in the corner of the drawing room, and in the circles under Leo's eyes, Kira's white nightgown trembled in the darkness. It's after 3, she whispered. I know it, but I have to study. There's a draft here. Please go back to bed. You're trembling. Leo, you will wear yourself out. Well, and if I do, that will be the end of it, so much the quicker. He guessed the look of the eyes he could not see in the darkness. He got up and gathered the trembling white shadow in his arms. Kira, of course I don't mean it. Just one kiss if you go back to bed. Even your lips are cold. If you don't go, I will carry you back. He lifted her in 2 arms, still strong and firm and warm through her nightgown. He carried her back into the bedroom, his head pressed close to hers, whispering, Just a few more pages and I will be with you. Go to sleep. Good night. Don't worry. In my duty of Apravdom, citizen Argonova, I gotta tell you, law is laws. Laws is laws. The rent is raised on account of neither you citizens being a Soviet employee that puts you in the category of persons living off an income. How do I know what income? Laws is laws. Behind him, men stood in line, men cringing, shrinking, crouching, hollow chest and hunched shoulders, yellow hands clasped and trembling, a few last conversions in the depths of extinguished souls, eyes staring with a forlorn hopelessness, a dull horror, a crushed plea, a line like that of at a stockyard. He stood among them, tall, straight, young, a god's form with lips that were still proud. A street walker passed by and stopped, and looked and startled at that man among the others and winked at invitation. He did not move, only turned his head away. That brings us to the end of chapter 13, Hard Life. Okay, I'll be reading the next chapter, chapter 14, in the next reading. Bye bye for now. If you have any kind of feedback, criticisms, comments, any recommendations, anything at all, any suggestions, all are welcome in the comment section of the video you're viewing or in the community section of the YouTube channel. You can reach out. Bye bye for now. Keep reading. Bye.